Over the past couple of months, many of us walking the streets of Boston have gotten used to sidestepping, and this at a time when all roads and all modes have been less traveled. As that begins to change with reopening, officials and advocates are exploring how to minimize health risks as well as inequities going back well before the pandemic. To tell us about ideas from the Livable Streets Alliance is its executive director, Stacy Thompson. Thank you very much for being with us, Stacy.
Thank you for having me.
Stacey, one thing that has come down the pipeline recently are the survey results from Massing Polling Group. Not very surprising. It says a lot more people are going to be either walking or driving their own cars. So how does that fit in with the kind of things that you've been thinking about at Livable Streets Alliance?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And we, of course, have paid very close attention to the Massing polling and other polling that has been going on with the Globe and other resources. And, what it's really showing is an affirmation that the issues we were raising in 2017, 2018, and 2019 are being crystallized right now, meaning that our roadways are largely not designed for people to move around them well. And we're seeing that firsthand, narrow sidewalks, broken sidewalks, lots of space for parking, or right now, cars driving very, very quickly because we've built very wide roads that are normally congested, but those same design problems have an opposite effect when there aren't cars on the road, meaning that cars are driving really fast, and we've seen an uptick in fatal crashes. So it's all to say, we're not surprised by the data because it's affirming what we know, which is that our streets aren't well designed for people. And I think the data on the T is also not surprising. But what I would also note is that there are some really good examples from places like China, other parts of Southeast Asia, where transit ridership is back up to near 80%, which seems like a dream for us, but they've done a really good job with cleaning, communicating, and contract tracing. And that is what has given the public confidence to get back on the transit system. So I think it's possible to turn those numbers around and encourage folks not to take their cars.
Well, one thing that you had your eye on long before the pandemic are the disparities in access to affordable transportation in Boston. What should be done about that now, especially since we're into the reopening phases?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would point folks to is to look at a map that the MBTA released showing which bus routes are experiencing higher ridership than the other parts of the system. And that map almost aligns perfectly with the map that we include in our 64 hours report, which we released about a year and a half ago, which shows the most under-resourced buses in the system, largely in our communities of color and our low-income neighborhoods. And so, what this tells us is that the number one priority we should be facing is, assuming we have enough drivers and enough vehicles, really increasing bus service in particular in the most impacted communities is the best direct benefit we can have. And additionally, we should really be trying to move quickly to build bus lanes in those communities so that as cars come back, we're really protecting and making sure that those bus rides are efficient and safe and well distanced so that everyone feels comfortable using the system.
Well, I can easily imagine space for lanes on Blue Hill Avenue, but once those buses get to Grove Hall, things tighten up. So how do you get around that kind of bottleneck?
Well, it's a great question. And I know this sounds controversial, but we are seeing cities all over the world say we're going to prioritize people first. And that means when you have a constraint, you focus on walking, biking, and transit, and cars last. So the first thing to go might be on-street parking. The next thing might be a car lane. In Downtown Crossing, for example, we have a space in the city where cars don't drive through. A delivery truck can get through, you can walk, you can bike. And I often point to people who say, oh, we have cow paths, that's just too hard. Paris is doing this. Milan is doing this, and their street infrastructure is more narrow and older than our street infrastructure.
There's another thing we have to worry about now with the reopening phase is what happens when some businesses start to reopen, some restaurants want space for outdoor dining, people walking through the main street districts are going down the street, they're dodging other people. So what can be done to make that work better?
It's a great question. And what I would really encourage folks to do is to just erase the notion that a street is only for a car. And so if we look at our streets as our largest shared public spaces, we can choose to use that space for commerce. And that might mean outdoor retail, that might mean outdoor seating for a restaurant. And I would remind folks that before the automobile, a good amount of commerce did happen in our streets. If we look at photos from the 1850s, 1900s, it was very common for individuals to set up shop on a street, and that was a public norm and a social norm. So what we would like to recommend, and again, what is happening in many other places, is that we open up space, particularly in the summer months, so that we can widen the sidewalk, which Brookline has done, or create designated space for retail or restaurants. And you can do it very quickly with cones and ropes and signs, and I think it could really help some of these businesses that we know are struggling.
One thing I overlooked in the massing polling is that it also shows an uptick in people who might want to use bikes.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been looking at is access to bike sharing. I didn't think it was that complex or that burdensome, but I guess for some people it really still is.
Yeah, it can be challenging. So there are two things that I would note. I would say the city of Boston has done a really good job expanding our bike share system over the last couple of years. But when we polled some of our partners in communities like Hyde Park, Dorchester, and Roxbury, one of the number one requests we saw was more access to bike share, that you really need to have a lot of stations, and that those stations need to be well connected, and that you need safe biking infrastructure for a new rider who maybe hasn't been on a bike in several years. They don't want to just hop on Warren Street or Blue Hill Ave or Columbia Road without a little protection. So that's one barrier, but another barrier is payment, particularly for individuals who are underemployed right now, who maybe already paid for their bus pass. It's an extra expense to also pay for a bike pass if you're, considering changing a mode. And so, the city did just launch a new $5 program for those who are in need. So we're getting there, but the cost of the system, the expansion of the system, where all of the bikes are placed, and then just the hurdle of maybe not having ridden a bike in a while can be challenging. I would say nationally, the purchase of bikes has skyrocketed, and that there's a real desire and demand for both access to bike share and safe biking infrastructure.
I want to ask you about the fare collection process. I know the T has been working on this maybe longer than they initially planned, but right now we have this current nightmare that if they go back to really making everybody pay, you get all of these people going in through one door, and then you have another huddle of people you have to squeeze by. I mean, that's a horror show, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is something that Livable Streets has been talking about for a while, and I would encourage everyone to think about sort of the difference between, or what are our values right now? And I would say our top value as a state is public health. And so I understand that the T is financially constrained and that they want to get every single dollar, but most people buy a weekly or monthly pass. And we think that it would be hugely valuable, both in terms of public safety and in terms of efficiency, to just open all the doors on buses and trolleys for people to get on and off. You actually save quite a bit of time at the actual bus stop, but people don't have to wait, they don't have to pass through, it's safer for the driver. And so we understand and recognize the financial constraints the team might go through, but we think in this moment, trying to collect sometimes literal pennies isn't worth the risk, and that the top priority is keeping people safe and keeping people moving. So let's open those doors.
Another idea you've been working on for quite a while is to have more bus shelters and more retail. This will be real-time information about when the next bus is actually going to be there. Is that a frill, or is that really essential?
No, it's really important. And I would say it's more important now than ever. As you know, only 8% of the bus stops in our system have some sort of shelter. And one of the things that we've heard from riders is that both crowding at the bus stop, in addition to crowding on the bus, is a concern. And that's because our sidewalks are narrow. So if we could take some street space and make the bus stop wider, larger, provide some covering, that would really make people feel much better while they're waiting for the bus. And another thing to consider is that the T has done a pretty good job of shifting bus schedules when they know that there's a higher demand. But you don't know that if you're just waiting for the bus, right? You may have looked at a schedule from a week or two ago and you don't actually know when that bus is going to come. And that creates a sense of fear and frustration. You maybe see a bus that shows up and it looks a little crowded and you don't know if you should get on it or not because the next one could come in 5 minutes or 25 minutes and you don't have that information. So I think it really, having real-time information, having a safe place to wait is critical to the success of our bus system in the coming months.